Once upon a time, somewhere in China, there lived a very wise man, and he had something to say about war and how winning it was a form of art. Sun Tzu was a Chinese military general and a military strategist. His treatise on the art of war is not just a gospel for battles fought through history since then, but also a gospel for winning boardroom strategies. Hello, everyone. I'm Sharbani Dhar, and today I'm going to talk to you about some of Sun Tzu's strategies and how they can be translated into a successful DesignOps strategy. So, before I get into that, let me tell you a story. So when COVID struck, and essentially it was time for children to go back to school, I had to convince my 8-year-old to wear a mask. And to convince an 8-year-old that he has to wear a mask all day in school, instead of, when he didn't have to wear one at home, is nothing short of getting into a war. So, I channeled my Sun Tzu that day, and I gave him these 3 options. And I told him, hey, you have to go to school, and guess what? You have to wear a mask. So which of these masks do you really like? Any guesses on which one he chose? I'm sure you all know it. And for those who think that he chose the blue one, you really haven't dealt with children yet. Anyways, Australia Post, unfortunately, or fortunately, is not an 8-year-old. We are a 210-year-old organization which shoulders the responsibility of providing services to some of the remotest parts of Australia, whether it's in a bushfire, floods, or even a pandemic. With an organization that is this old, there are multiple challenges, multiple complexities. And we've got a 210-year-old legacy, as well as legacy systems to deal with. And along with that, stakeholder management can often be tricky. And we fail. We fail often. This is going to be a story of some of our failures, few of our successes as well. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without really fighting it. When we think of design, we think of creativity. We think of innovation. We think of the greater good. We never think of war. But how many of you, and it would be great if you can tell me with a show of hands, how many of you have felt when you have this beautiful presentation, some great design ideas to share in front of your stakeholders as well as your development team, that you're bracing yourself for war? Lots of hands. I'm glad we are on the same page. DesignOps is the synergy between people, processes, as well as craft that can help you fight that war. People is nothing but your team, as well as the teams that you are helping support and how they work together. Process is nothing but how we get the work done. And finally, craft is how we really create that impact to prove the value of design. When you have DesignOps strategy laid out, you have the most effective weapon with you to fight your design wars. So the first step, laying plans. Laying the right plan is the first and foremost thing in your strategy. In your DesignOps strategy, in order to get it right, you have to get the foundation right. When seeking to determine the conditions in a battlefield, it's really important to understand what does it look like? What is it composed of? And Sun Tzu had defined the conditions of battlefield through his 5 constants. The 5 constants of Sun Tzu are moral law. Moral law is nothing but the law or the values that govern the ruler of a country that's going into war. Then comes heaven. Is it sunny outside? Is it raining? Is it winter? Is it summer? What does the day really look like when the army is going into battle? And then it's earth. What is the terrain looking like? Is there a river flowing in front of you? Are there mountains? Are there valleys? Is it a narrow gully? What is the distance that the army has to really travel? And then comes your method and discipline. Does the army have the right tools to fight the war? Does it know what methodology to use in different situations? And does it have the discipline to follow them? And finally, the commander. Is the army loyal to the commander? Will it obey the commander? Is the army following the commander out of loyalty, trust, or because he inspires them? Or is it because of fear? In the same way, when you think of DesignOps constants, the same can be translated into your DesignOps strategy. Your moral law is nothing but the company values. The values that ground your company, that can be the anchor for any design problem or a solution. The anchor that you can point your stakeholders to whenever you're having a conflict. Your heaven is nothing but the condition in which your team is going into war. So what is really the maturity of the team that your team is dealing with? When I talk of maturity, it means design maturity. So do the stakeholders think that design is nothing but, drawing boxes on paper or putting together screens? Or does the team have high maturity where they think that design is a way of solving problems collaboratively and in a creative manner? What is the maturity? What does the heaven look like? And then comes earth, which is nothing but the non-negotiables in your team. So what is the funding? What is the technological limitation? As well as what is something that you really can't negotiate on in terms of deadlines? Is your team having the right kind of tools and processes in play to know how to deal with a design problem given the context it has? Does it have design systems? Does it have content systems? Does it have the right kind of playbook to pick out the right place from? And finally, what is the kind of leader that is leading the team? And what is the culture that they're defining? Is the team motivated? Is it engaged? When you have all of these constants, you are ready to get into the war, or rather, you are ready to make and influence change. But war is expensive. Conflicts cost money. In any war, to keep the army motivated, to keep them fed, to keep the weapons sharpened and ready, it costs money. In the same way, DesignOps strategy also costs effort. So what does Sun Tzu really have to say to that? He says to forage on your enemy, or rather, steal from your enemy. What does the stealing really mean? What is it that you can really steal from your stakeholders? And no, you can't steal your Post-its and Sharpies because that's the organizations. What you really steal is your stakeholders' intent. Know what the stakeholder is really planning to do. What is their hidden goal? Is it their KPIs? What is really their mindset? What does success mean to them? Information in any form is gold. The data that supports your stakeholders' intent, the data that is against your stakeholders' intent, know all of it and own it. And make your every team member own it. Once the intent is translated down to every member of the team, that's when you can have a shared objective. And while information is gold, relationships are priceless. So how do you really adopt the stakeholders' intent, make it your own, and then move from conflict where you're enemies to a relationship of collaboration, where you're allies and working towards a common goal and common intent. The experience brief is one such tool that we use for capturing our stakeholders' intent. And it can be anything that you can use in your organization. It can be a UX canvas, it can be just a set of questions, it can be a basic briefing template, anything. Anything which allows you to know what are the user problems in the mind of your stakeholder, what are the business problems that they are trying to deal with, what does success really mean to them, whether it's user success, business success, what is it that's going on? And while you're capturing this, try to understand the mindset that they are in. Because once you start to capture it and you document it, this hidden goal starts to become your currency. And this currency is something that you can keep using at every stage of the process. Because every time there's a conflict, you can go back to this document, use this currency, and point out that this is what you desired as an outcome. This is what you said means the success of your user. So let's come back to it. This is also a great tool when you have got cutting down of scope. We all know MVPs, right? How a minimum viable product is always a nightmare for design when scope gets cut down and one of the first casualties is design. That is when you go back to this currency and say, hey, with our first release, have we answered any of the user problems we documented? Have we captured any of the successes that we think would have been a success for our product? Next comes energy. The control of energy decides how you win the war. At times, a small problem might require your entire energy to solve it. At other times, something that seems really big might just involve a blitz of energy and everything is great. But what is your energy? Your team is your energy. As a leader of DesignOps, you need to decide how do you focus your energy in the right places? How do you really direct your team so that their skill sets, their motivations, and their capabilities are best utilized? There are times when your energy may not be also required at all. I've had one stakeholder once come to me and say, hey, I've got 3 weeks of funding, I have the solution, my developers have mapped out the user flows, I just need somebody to draw out the screens for me. This is the time when I'd rather point him to a vendor who can get the job done for him and make sure that my team stays engaged in more meaningful, more meatier projects. This way, I'm not only helping the stakeholder, but also at the same time, making sure that my team's motivation and engagement stays intact. We all are aware of the double diamond, but sometimes breaking down the double diamond into what we have versus what we don't have also helps direct the flow of energy. It is also a great conversation tool. So, for example, in the case of an unknown problem, an unknown solution, what we have might be an observed customer issue. We might know, or we might have a basic hypothesis, but we might not have the end-to-end impact of the problem. We might not know what are our basic how might we's that we want to work with. And in the same way, when you move towards the end of the diamond, you might have everything in terms of the solution you want to go for, the absolute clarity on what are the user flows, but you may not have maybe the micro interactions, the exact designs, the accessibility considerations, the content that is going into the design. So looking at all of that and balancing it out makes you decide who in your team is best suited to attack a problem at a certain stage. Then comes one of the most important parts. How do you really hire and develop your people right? In the words of Jared Spool, most organizations these days hire in the T model. What the T model means, that while you have your experienced design team, every individual is an expert in a craft. So, for example, you might have researchers, you might have designers, you might have information architects, content writers. Everybody is an expert in their specific craft, but nobody really knows about the other crafts. We have a program of work where we have about 5 to 7 designers and 3 to 4 researchers supporting them. And at a point of time, we were in a situation where all the research load was focused on the researchers. And they were doing everything from validation studies, quant and call studies, discovery research, field interviews, customer interviews, everything. The result of this was there was a massive load on all the researchers, and they were starting to get reactive instead of proactive. Most of their work started to be delivery-focused instead of being future-focused. So what then we started to do was move into a waterfall model. I'm sorry, I think something is getting wrapped over here, but essentially what the waterfall model means is that while you have your experienced design team where everybody has got different skill sets, everybody is also trained in other skill sets and bits and pieces so that they can cover for the team when the major skill set is loaded up. So our researchers started to train our designers in some basic research tools, giving them the capability to do validation research, to do some quick quant and call testing using different research tools. What it enabled for them was essentially they could free up their capacity to focus on more meatier pieces of research, and also designers and content writers felt more empowered because now they could control their research and really get it done instead of having to wait for the researcher capacity to get freed up. One very interesting, I don't want to call it side effect, but essentially one very interesting outcome that came out of this exercise was also that our team had better empathy for the other crafts. And they were now more understanding of what the load and what the quality was involved in each of the crafts. I would say that's a great outcome. Weak points and strong. Anything is as strong as its weakest point. And in the same way, any product is as strong as the risks that it poses. In company speak, a risk is essentially something that compromises the success of your product. And as designers, it is our job to anticipate risk and highlight them because the rest of the team is in a delivery mode. They are focused for delivery, whereas you all have that end-to-end view. But how do you really highlight that? We have a very interesting product, and it makes really good money for the organization. The reason being that it is the only product of its kind currently in Australia. While it makes great money for the organization, there are some experience haves that our customers have been asking for. Unfortunately, because it's been generating revenue, the room for experience changes has never been felt by the stakeholder. Why change anything when it's already doing great, right? And a lot of times, your stakeholders in these instances, especially when something is generating revenue, find it very hard to relate to call metrics. What does really an effort score mean to me? What does NPS really mean to me when I'm already making money? Why do I even really want to worry about that? And that's when our team first started to highlight the weak points. And the weak points for a product generating revenue is the potential to generate more revenue. So essentially, they started to highlight all the points where the journey was breaking, where the user was abandoning their cart, wherever there was a complete breakdown in the user journey. But then they did a very interesting thing as well. They decided to quantify it. In order to quantify it, we use this model where essentially we break it down into the reach, frequency, and severity of the problem. Reach is nothing but how many customers is it really affecting? And now you don't have to go and count every customer in the market of your product. It's a relative scale. So on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being, say, it just affects, say, 10% of our customers because it's a really small subset, versus a 5, where it's affecting and impacting all of our customers. Then it's frequency. So how many times in the user flow is this problem occurring? So, for example, an ID check, where people using passports versus people using the driver's license. Maybe it's only affecting a very small subset, where you will give it a 1 scale, versus, say, a 3, where everybody using passports, so 50% of the users, roughly, are expecting this problem, versus a 5, where all of the users going through the user flow are expecting this issue. And then finally, severity. How bad is the problem? Is it a minor issue on a scale of 1, where a minor optimization will solve it for you? Is it an issue which the user is facing, but they have a workaround for it? So they call the call center, they go to a brick and mortar store, and they're able to solve the problem. So say it's a 3. And finally, maybe it's a 5, where they are just not able to resolve the issue. It's a complete task abandonment. When you put your problem through these numbers and give that, you're actually speaking the stakeholders' language. And one more thing, you do it collectively. You sit with your stakeholders and arrive at these numbers, because then they can empathize how severe the problem is. Maneuvering. So, maneuvering an army is really important. But when you don't have the right methods in place, it can cause failure. We expect change, but sometimes change is unexpected as well. Say the company values changed, there's a new CEO, the funding changed. Or in the case of a design problem, maybe you captured some design feedback and you have to pivot. But is your team in a safe space to be able to pivot? Have you given them the right frameworks, the right kind of tools to allow for that? And this is where a DesignOps strategy becomes really important. I call this my version of the DesignOps Maslow pyramid. So my boss says that I have this obsession with Maslow's pyramids, and probably he's right. So the most fundamental part of a Maslow's pyramid for DesignOps is tools. Does your team have the right kind of tools to be poised for success? Once they have the right kind of tools, they are able to perform, and they're able to have the right craft. Does your craft have the right kind of methodologies to be able to do the right kind of work and create quality work? Once they start creating quality work, do they have the right kind of culture? Are they motivated? Are they engaged? Or are they disconnected? Once you start establishing the culture, the craft, the tools, the team is able to be in a position that they are able to perform. And then you can actually start to measure the performance. So have you got the right methodologies to measure the performance of your team and prove their value? And once you start measuring the performance and start speaking in a language that your stakeholder understands, because now you're starting to prove the value of design, you build that empathy with your stakeholder. You are speaking the same language. You just don't have internal team empathy, but external team empathy as well. And when everybody has empathy with each other, they can work together for a unified purpose. This is not just a stepping stone for your DesignOps strategy for implementing it, but also for gauging where exactly is your team currently. Is it at the craft stage? Is it at the culture stage? Is it at a performance stage? Spies. Sounds a bit negative. I'm sure none of us likes to be spied upon. None of us likes to spy on people. Yeah, most of us at least. But when it comes to design speak, I would say spies is nothing but letting the stakeholder be your eyes. I think all the presentations before me spoke about this. making the stakeholder a partner in your journey. And this is really important because it's important for the stakeholder to see firsthand what your customers are facing, definitely, but it's also important for your stakeholder to see the kind of effort and passion your team is putting in to solve the problem. And this is where a design ops leader can play a very important role. So, as designers, we often fight for that coveted seat at the table without really offering a chair at our own. And this is where the final constant of commander becomes really important. As a leader of design ops, what is the kind of culture that you're setting up your team for? Is the designer a hero in your team, the Lone Ranger? Or is he or she a facilitator of conversations, a facilitator of outcomes? So, make it a part of the agreement for the engagement of your team, where it is agreed right in the beginning that the stakeholders, the development team, the BAs, everybody will be participating in every aspect of the design process, whether it's research, whether it is actual design, ideation, testing, and validation. Because once they do that, they start to really own the product and speak your language on behalf of you. They essentially become your spies. And sometimes it's not just a part of agreement, but also part of the design plan, how you plan out the engagement from the beginning to the end. We have a product called mail redirection. So whenever you change houses, so say you're moving from one house to the other, you tell Australia Post that, hey, can you please send my mail the other way? And this is where we first time tried this engagement, where we invited the stakeholders and we said that, hey, we are going to solve this problem for you. We are going to try our best, but we need you. So everybody from the developers, BAs, and even the head of product was going on field studies with us. We trained them on research ethics. We gave them a bit of briefing on how to behave during a custom interview, and they were actually participating with us. Another thing we try is buddy programs, where essentially the team is encouraged to form the neighborhood post office a buddy, so that they can capture insights directly from the post office staff as well as the customers that visit the post office. And the third thing we try is post office forums. We've got post offices across metros, regional areas, as well as rural areas. So we actually invite all of them, representatives from those post offices. We make them try out designs, especially that are retail facing, and then give us feedback. And these sessions are attended by the whole team. So far, working towards a continuously improving design operations strategy has enabled us to build and establish a continuous culture of measure and learn, have partnerships instead of a handed down list of requirements, and finally be in a position where design can inform strategy. But what does it all mean for you? Winning a war without fighting is really important because of prolonged stakeholder conflicts, nothing is really achieved. When you have prolonged stakeholder conflicts, your design solutions are only going to be piecemeal and not have any meaningful value. Preparation and speed. It's really important to resolve conflicts very quickly. Is your team poised to do that? Does your team have the right kind of safety and frameworks to enable that? Foreknowledge of intent, data, and weaknesses is your hidden gold. Utilize it, share it, make every team member know of it. And be the leader that you want to have. If your team knows that there's a great culture, the company is good, and the leadership has your back, they feel that they are in a safe space to challenge and really strive for innovation and perfection. And finally, your stakeholder is not your enemy. They are your partner in the process, so make them one. Bring them along in the journey and do the work along with you, design together with you. Thank you very much.